Finance and Property Committee to order. First item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public comment. We have had a request from David Baker to provide comments. If you'd like to come forward. I think you're familiar with the routine. So.
Well, thank you for allowing me to make public comments. My name is David Baker. I reside in Kronewetter, Wisconsin, and I write opinion at Marathon County Spotlight. So I'm here to address the $12 million conduit financing request from Bug Tussle. And I know this will be probably a difficult decision because the broadband is an important issue, and it's invaluable to many of our constituents, many of our residents in Marathon County. But I handed out a document that I had done a couple years ago when I was on the board, and we have had a large increase in debt over the last few years, and we're really above the self-imposed county debt limit that's in section 1.515, which no one likes to talk about, but that's in ordinances. So if you're on the HR Finance Committee and you haven't looked at that section, please give that a glance. So I guess my concern with this financing is twofold. One is that it is a large amount of money relative to what we've already guaranteed. And it also brings into question, to me, the viability of the project. So we're guaranteeing more money for a project that's going to be 50% over budget, and also the overall budget, I believe, is going from like 79 million or 70 something million up to 250 million. And to me, it appears that that is going to bring into question the viability of the project. I'm assuming it was, projected to make money at the lower amount, but if that goes up by a factor of 3, I would think that's going to call into question the feasibility of the project as a whole. And therefore, the odds of us having to guarantee pay that money back to me, would be at question. So I would like to have that looked at to see, okay, if we don't do that, is the project still going to go forward? If we get those towers back at this point, which I'm sure is not going to happen, is that enough collateral for what we've already guaranteed? In the conduit financing section, in our section 1.51, it does say that the county may look at the business's feasibility and capital position. I'm not quoting verbatim, but I think that should be done before this moves forward, if we have not done that already. Thank you.
I have a call-in user. Would the call-in user, area code 9209, ending in 38, would you identify yourself, please?
Yep, it's Mitch Olson from Bug Tussle.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other public comments? Any other public comments? If not, we will move on to the approval of the minutes from the May 21st meeting. What are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Lemmer. Is there a second to approve? Second by Supervisor Reynolds. Any discussion, comments, corrections? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We have Chair Gibbs is at another meeting and is excused. All right, but we have a quorum present. We will now move on to item 6A1, approval of the May claims and question costs that was sent out both as a report and in an Excel spreadsheet. What are your wishes? Move to approve the claims in question cost. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Marshall. Moved by Lemmer, seconded by Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Disallowance of claim, Rocky Hanson. Mike, Corporation Counsel Pruner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The claim that was made is in your packet, and I can provide some additional information as well. This is a claim that resulted from some damage to a rear windshield on a vehicle. The vehicle was parked near or at the Big Bull Falls gazebo during the time that Parks Department personnel were mowing. The owner of the vehicle believed that a rock was sent from the mower and struck the rear windshield. In looking into the claim, our insurer found that the mowers that are being used are not side discharge mowers. All the safeguards were in place. They're functioning as they should. The staff who were operating the mowers were not aware that there was any discharge and didn't witness the window being damaged. Based upon the mowers operating the way that they should, having all the safeguards in place, and the recommendation from the insurer, they're recommending that the claim be denied because the county would not have any liability for a rock being ejected if there was no negligence in the upkeep of the mowers, and additionally, some question as to what caused the damage in the first place.
Are there any questions of Corporation Counsel? If not, what are your wishes? Move to deny the claim by Supervisor Poole. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion on the denial? If not, all those in favor of denying the claim will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Next, we'll go to item 6B1, DADCAP, Producer-Led Watershed Protection Grant. Christie's on. Christy, are you going to provide us an overview?
Sure. I would be happy to do that. That's no problem. This is just a very simple and straightforward request. Our conservation department is working with Marathon County's producer-led group EPIC, the Oaklain Partnership for Integrated Conservation, and we would like to host a regional event for all producer-led groups, watershed groups, and lake associations within the entire Wisconsin River Basin. So we recently connected with DATCAP, the Wisconsin Department of Ag. They had a special pot of money that they received from one of their conservation partners specifically to host a large regional event to connect groups together focused on a common purpose. And so EPIC reached out to one of our conservation partners, the Packers. The acronym is PACRS, the Pt.1 and Castle Rock Stewards. So they're on a flowage just south of us on the Wisconsin River. And we'd like to partner with them to host this event at the Big Plain County Park in July. It would be fully funded through this grant that we received. It's $6,500. So we would expect a couple hundred people to come to the event from around the state. And we've already reached out and made connections, and we're hoping that the county would approve of us accepting this one-time funding to host a first of its kind regional event focused on watershed management and building partnerships and community within the Wisconsin River Basin.
Are there any questions? Any questions? If not, what are the wishes of the committee? This would be a budget transfer. Moved by Supervisor Marshall. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Reynolds. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the acceptance of the grant will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Next, budget transfer Dells of the Eau Claire Dump Station. Do we have a representative?
Yep. Chair Robinson, this is Jamie Polly.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know if you could hear me. This is just a request. We had received ARPA dollars in 2023 or 2022 to complete the water upgrades at Marathon Park, and we have funding remaining in that budget that has not been spent and will not be spent of around $70,000 that will be turned back or reused for something else. We're requesting because then we also got ARPA funding for Dells of Eau Claire Dump Station, and when we went out for RFP and actually had the contractors come out and verify what is needed, it was found that they can't do a mound system as they thought they could, and they need to do tube tanks, which made the pricing higher. So we're requesting the utilization of some remaining funds from the Marathon Park ARPA dollars to go towards the dump station so we can get that completed to the code that it needs to be.
So is the Marathon Park coming in under budget?
It is, correct. Yep, it was about 70,000 under budget.
All right. Are there any other questions for Jamie? Supervisor Lammer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, can you just remind me, this is a required project to keep the park functional and open the way we want it to be. Is that correct?
Correct. If we did not put a dump station out there, we would have to eliminate campsites.
Any other questions, comments? If not, what are the wishes? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering the second page, that a budget transfer request supplemental. So if the underfunding of Marathon Park, for anything that is underfunded, do we still need to do a CIP for a replacement project?
Both of these have been approved as part of the KIP. So we're basically redirecting resources to do it. So do we need to amend the KIP as well as doing the budget transfer to reflect the change in costs?
Mr. Chair, this is Corporation Counsel Pierner. This is actually designed as an intra-departmental budget transfer. So it's from two already budgeted items within the Parks Department budget, and it would redirect some of those funds from the under budget project to the project that's expected to be over budget. So it doesn't require an amendment of the KIP because they're already approved projects, and it doesn't require a budget amendment with the full board because it's intra-department. It just requires approval by this committee.
But with the use of ARPA dollars, was our resolution on the allocation of the ARPA dollars specific to the project? And if yes, will we then need to amend the resolution relative to the expenditure of the ARPA dollars?
Our resolutions on the allocation of the ARPA dollars are typically up to a certain amount. As Administrator Leonard, I think, just correctly indicated, these were both accomplished through the budget. They were budgeted into the Parks Department budget. So again, I do think it's just an intra-departmental budget transfer without any additional action required. I don't think we have to address anything else because there wasn't a separate resolution on the ARPA allocation for these projects, but the administrator can weigh in if he feels differently.
I think that's accurate. And Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong. The water project came in substantially under budget, so there's still a portion of that, of the contemplated budget for the water project that would remain. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
So that, to your point, Mr. Chair, one of the things this committee has talked frequently about is kind of keeping an eye on the remaining ARPA balances from those projects. You would have the ability at a later date, and we should at a later date, again, see where we are with respect to all the completed projects. And then should you desire to fund something that wasn't already contemplated within your budget, I think it would be appropriate to redirect it outside of as an existing KIP project, because essentially, as Corporation Counsel alluded to, this is already within a designated fund within the budget. And I think Christie is on. If Christie, is there anything you can add that might make this less confusing? I don't want to make it more confusing, but my sense is consistent with Mike's. Based on our rules, we talked about this, that it would really be, it's short of that full board budget amendment. Based on your rules, you have the authority to do that intra-fund, I should say, intra-fund transfer.
No, I agreed with Mike when we talked about this earlier, and there was no new revenue. Budget resolution goes forth for budget transfers when there's additional revenue added, and these were both approved as budgeted items. So I don't see any other need to go forward with a budget resolution to the county board. And I think Jamie has it under her purview to be tracked and throughout the process anyway, so we would know what costs were being allocated to each as she goes through and completes both projects.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The way I look at this is we looked at the revenue for the campsites that we would possibly have to reduce if we didn't do the dump station, and it was considered narrowly positive to replace the dump station at that level. Now that we're increasing the cost by $38,000 for those few campsites, I look at this as the underfunding in Marathon Park should not be simply deciding that we'll do another project, where we should look at what are all the other competing interests, and again, prioritize those rather than simply replace them with interdepartmentally, because I just look at it as money that we can allocate within the county and not simply within the park department. So I will not be supporting the request.
I have a question for Chris, because I'm still not sure. I think we have our own internal policies and procedures, but we also have the U.S. Treasury guidelines relative to obligation and encumbrance. How did we track this from the perspective of allocation of the ARPA funds? Were these project specific based upon the adoption of the KIP, or were they more generic in nature?
In the past, we tracked them by resolution, but in the 2024 annual budget that was passed in November, there was a little over $11 million worth of projects that were assigned ARPA funding. And so we've been tracking those by project number because we have that ability now in Workday. And that's how that's what I use is by project number to associate the projects to see where we are in regards to the ARPA funding. But in the past, under legacy system, we did track them by resolution number. But starting with the 2024 CIP, I'm tracking those by project number funded with CIP. So there's a little both.
So again, let me ask the question that Mike answered in terms of meeting the U.S. Department of Treasury requirements relative to obligation of funds. The fact that we obligated the funds for a water project at Marathon Park, and then we obligated funds for a dump station at the Big O Plain Park. Are those separate and distinct obligations, or is there a blended obligation? My concern is in an audit situation looking for the appropriate authorization on the use of those funds. And I guess I would be comfortable taking action today, but ask that we review that in light of the U.S. Department of Treasury guidelines, what we've tracked that as, and to see if we're in compliance. And if need be, we will, if appropriate and needed, we will need to run this through the county board in spite of it being an interdepartmental transfer. So is this is it a project obligation, or is it a capital improvement program generic, broader obligation?
The U.S. Treasury doesn't see if the county board approves an annual budget, that is not an obligation under the definitions by the U.S. Treasury in regards to the ARPA funding. There needs to be additional information on that, such as a contract, purchase order, or other obligation with a contractor. But any of those contracts that are under obligation according to the U.S. Treasury are able to be funded with ARPA, and you can transfer project funding, ARPA project funding, from one project to the other. So at this time, if you're comfortable assuming it's an underfunded Parks Department project, that's great. That does not mean that it meets the qualifications of the U.S. Treasury definition of obligation, as it refers back to their guidance for ARPA grants. That would need to have additional documentation, such as a contract or other written documentation that we are committed to completing the work.
Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'm hearing where you're coming from, in that the water project had a specific area within the Treasury guidelines in terms of whether or not it was eligible. And Chrissy, you'd probably be able to speak to this a little better than I, but I think if this would fall under the lost revenue calculation, then that would still similarly make it eligible under ARPA through that mechanism. Whether or not it had additional qualifications under the Treasury's guidelines, it's obviously, sometimes you'd want to have those to say, like, look, we hit lost revenue, but also a water thing and other aspects of what they're aiming those funds to. But if it would fall out of the water project sort of eligibility rules and under lost revenue, that might be what you're getting at. And I think in this case, it would be approved in either one of those based on the different projects. It wouldn't mean because it was obligated to a water project that it would have to be strictly to that eligible use on a similar project falling under lost revenue.
Supervisor Marshall.
The category of revenue isn't what determines that. It's whether or not the project has been obligated under the Treasury, and that would be when Jamie works with the vendor in order to get the project completed. And that's going to be an issue that we'll discuss over the course of this year, because we'll want to make sure that we have closeout of all open projects with ARPA, and that we have other projects that have been approved by the county board and or under contract prior to the end of this year, so that we can make sure that we maintain the ARPA funding for all projects that we've designated. Their definition of obligation is not just approval by a county board on an annual budget basis, but the classification of revenue source is not actually what's germane here. It's really that we've made a commitment that we can document to complete the project under the dollar amount that has been defined.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forget the original cost of the project. I don't have the ARPA dollars in front of me. But if you add in the $38,000 to that original cost, and you divide it by the number of campsites that we would potentially have to reduce if we did not go forward with this project, what is the cost per campsite to keep those campsites open? So say it's $100,000 and now we have to reduce 10 campsites, that's $10,000 per campsite. So just wondered if you have those numbers, Jamie. And what I'm looking at is an opportunity cost. Is this the best use county-wide of that $38,000 or that savings in Marathon Park of $70,000? Thank you.
Jamie, can you answer that?
Looking at the budget right now, the initial allocation of ARPA funding for that project was $36,549. So the additional encumbrance of 38,000 brings the total to 74,549 for the total project. Does that sound right, Jamie?
Yeah, sorry. I hit instead of hitting the unmute button, I hit the end button and I kicked myself out. I didn't hear everything that you said, Lance, but I'm assuming what you said was correct. But one of the things I want to point out too is that, as I pointed out during these project costs at the Dells of Eau Claire, we have an additional 60 acres that in a long range plan is planned for additional campsites. And so even, right now we may be talking about the 28 sites that are there and the 9 we would have to close if we don't put in this dump station. But if we add any sites or want to add any sites, we will have to add a dump station in the future. And this one dump station, with the number of sites we anticipate putting in the future, would suffice, and we would not need a second dump station that we are aware of at this time, unless we go over, I think, 200 and some sites. So it's an investment in the future as well as just being able to keep our current campground open and compliant with what we have. And unfortunately, it's the bedrock that we found out there. And as you know, Dells of Eau Claire are built on beautiful rock formations. The bedrock is what we have found to eliminate the mound system and require this additional costing of this extra tank, which is what is the increase in cost that went over what was asked for to be allocated.
Any other questions or motions? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what are we looking at right now? Are we looking at a motion to pass this through this committee and then the budget transfer goes through, or are we still waiting on questions as to whether or not we can do this with ARPA?
You want to take it?
I think based on the comments of Christie and Mike's were consistent with our own internal policies. Christie has indicated that the resolution adopted by the county board is sort of an authorizing, but the obligation would be with a contract. So I'm going to try to interpret her comments as saying that by transferring the funds and entering the contract, we will meet the requirements of the Department of Treasury. So the question is whether you support the basically reallocation from within the ARPA expenditures or not. And so the request from the Parks Department is to transfer $38,000 into the fund for the dump station. Does that clarify? Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. I, on the one hand, would support this wholeheartedly. I use the park a lot. We go there several times a year. It's one of my favorites. Although I do not camp, I just walk. But what are the future costs of doing a holding tank style versus I forgot what the other word was. Is this going to be a $38,000 fee and it's done, or are there extra operating costs that are going to add to it? I know expanding a campsite will add to operational costs, but is there anything additional that hidden in there that we need to think about, that I need to think about maybe before I can support this?
Jamie, do you want to take whether or not there's additional operating costs with going I mean, we have to transition. We can't do the mound system based on the geology at the site. I mean, that's always a consideration for, I know we are all very educated on personal on-site wastewater treatment systems here in Marathon County. That's just the nature of where we are based on the rock. It could be in other parts of the county that you don't have sufficient types of soils. But regardless, that's our situation. Jamie, do you want to talk about whether or not from your perspective there's a difference in operational budget that you'll have to account for in the budgeting process? And then also if you can just clarify, if there's not funding for this expansion, how many campsites as they are currently utilized as electric sites would need to stop?
We would have to make of our current electric sites into tent only, in addition to the 3 now, in order to be compliant. So we have to be under, we have 28 sites total. 3 are non-electric. They're not necessarily tent only. That has to be specified. We have to be under 20 sites of tent only, very specific, where no RVs can even just park there to meet code, is the first question. The second one is, I guess, we do not have an estimated budget for how many campsites we would add out there. We know we have 60 acres, but that would take some planning based on the topography of what we could add. I think in general long-term planning plans, we know we could put about probably 100 more campsites out there to be very compatible with Big O Plain in the future, but that would still have to be planned, and the cost would have to be determined. That's hasn't been done yet. As far as operating costs, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lance.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. I think that, and you're getting there, so sorry to interrupt, Jamie.
No, as far as operating costs, making them, from what we do today, making it 10 sites versus RV sites really doesn't change how we operate. We still need the staffing out there for the campers that we have and the activities that we have. If we put in a dump station, there is a little bit of added time for our staff to make sure it's operational, cleaned out, but it's very minimal on our end. So it really doesn't add or take away from our staffing costs, whether we have the dump station or not. It's an amenity that will hopefully increase some revenue by having more people go there with the convenience of a dump station that we don't currently have.
Supervisor Hart first, and then, sorry.
Well, one of the things I think we should consider, because we're talking about opportunity cost, is the cost of the investment that the county has already put into putting in those campsites. So a county board, how long ago that was, put an investment to build these campsites. And now we're saying we're not going to potentially further invest in that and waste that investment that a county board has taken out. So I just want that to be considered too.
So, Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess just a question for Jamie. I know we've talked considerably and the board has asked each of the departments to look at, what are our rates and fees. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about the conversation that, if any, has been had relative to the Park Commission and increasing camping rates, and what is anticipated moving forward? Should those, should the amenity that you just referenced continue?
Yes, so we have been increasing the camping rates by $1 the past couple of years. So we look at surrounding campgrounds too and make sure that we're still, not outpricing anybody. But we do have a dump station fee that people do pay for our dump station at both Big O Plain and Marathon Park, where we have those. So that would be, in addition to us looking at increasing the campsite reservation a little bit more to be more compatible with those other 2 campgrounds, we would have increased revenue from the dump station itself as well. And just to, one of the extra items I wanted to bring as far as history goes, when the campground was currently put in, the code was different, and it allowed for, if it was under 30 sites, then it allowed for a campground to operate without a dump station as long as a dump station was within 25 miles. And so Marathon Park meets that requirement. I can't remember exactly when it changed, but the code has changed, and that's when it changed to if you have to have 20 or less to meet those requirements. So because we have 28, we now fall outside of those requirements.
Going forward, I think what's troubling to members of the committee and others is the lack of details relative to the request before us. In the future, I will not put on the agenda items that are not explained in more detail relative to what the purpose is and other things. And I think we need that information to make the decision. So I would request that, Christy, when you're advancing them, that we have the sufficient detail and the explanation. And this one is, we basically doubled the size of the project through the transfer. And not to say that it doesn't merit going forward, but I think some of that detail would be helpful for making a decision on a policy issue. So I'm making that request of administration, and when they put forth these items.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, and we'll certainly endeavor to do that moving forward. I apologize.
That's all right. Other questions, comments, or motions? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So another thing I want to bring out, because I had just saw this flash on my screen at work, was an article that came out just today that said that tourism in Marathon County brought in $500 million to this economy in the county. That's a huge, it's a lot for our county. And Marathon County itself had an increase year over year of 6.4%, which was one of the largest out of all the counties in Marathon County. So in light of that, and knowing how important tourism is, and especially camping in this area, I think it would be a really poor choice to close down campsites because of something that we could have done, especially when the funds are there, not through levy. So with that, I'm going to make a motion to accept this budget transfer.
Is there a second? Moved by Supervisor Hart, seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Marshall.
Again, my objection is that we are not looking at all of the projects that are within the park department or even within the county as a whole. I'm not saying this doesn't have merit. I'm saying we have not done the work to prioritize everything that might be out there. So that's my objection. Thank you.
Any other comments? Supervisor Hart.
I guess on that, I have one other question as to when would those campsites have to be closed if we didn't accept this now?
Well, I'll let Jamie weigh in, but as your administrator, technically if you read the statute and your code, part of my job is to ensure that all state laws and local ordinances are followed. So if we're not going to operate contrary to code. So if we don't have line of sight to that project being completed, and we don't do projects we can't pay for, we don't sign contracts for things we don't pay for, Jamie and I are going to sit down and we're going to, I don't know how we pick which 9 campsites to identify as tent only, but we're going to do that. I don't know, Jamie, if you have a contrary approach.
I'm just going to interject. I think there's still so many unanswered questions. I would, it's hard for me to, I would put a request in that we potentially delay this we have a meeting in a week to give the Parks Department the opportunity to provide some of that background information to us in the context of the reservations, the operational cost and other things, and put some more context to this. if the mover and the second would be willing to do that, I would be, we could kick it to the next week to give Jamie, Christie, and others a chance to provide that information.
I'm willing to withdraw my motion as long as those campsites don't close in between now and then.
And I know Jamie can't.
Chair Robinson.
Oh,
Yes.
go ahead, Jamie.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things I would like to say, I guess, is that we provided I don't have it in front of me right now because I'm in between meetings and trying to do too many things at one time, but we provided all of that information to the county board when we presented this as a priority project. And it is a priority project to us. Those were all vetted when we did our CIP projects and bring them forward because of the fact that it is a code violation. And in that documentation that was provided to the county board was a letter from our health department indicating that they supported this project because it does not meet code and we would have to follow the guidelines, as Lance said. So that's part of it. I guess I'm not really understanding what more information we're looking for, but also I'm leaving for vacation tomorrow through the 24th, so I wouldn't be able to get any information in a week.
I can pull, though, to your point, Jamie, I know we have that from the CIP request that came in last year as part of the budget. We can pull that and bring it back to the committee. We did try to, and again, I apologize, we tried to move fast for the reason Jamie just alluded to, get this on your agenda here so Jamie could answer those questions. But we can pull the CIP project information from our consideration process as part of the 2024 budget. I think that'll get at a lot of the things that you just alluded to. And one other piece, I think, just want to make everyone aware, this was the kind of the easiest way for us to move forward with kind of that funding strategy. We met as an internal team to talk about how to accomplish it. But I think to Supervisor Marshall's point, there certainly are other ways if you choose to. I mean, there are other strategies to fund a project, and some may require, as Mike alluded to and Christie did, a formal budget amendment by the county board if perhaps we were to use contingency or some other area within the budget. Yes. But this one simply came to this committee, so we can bring back the additional information that was in that CIP presentation.
So the motion has been withdrawn, and I would just ask, I think we'll just defer this item to the next meeting and try to get that information. Supervisor Poole.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. One additional request. Could we get information on the usage rates out there and also any reservations that are coming, what the reservation schedule's like, just to get an idea how much usage this county park has for camping? Thank you. It can be next meeting.
All right. Thank you. We'll now move on to the opioid litigation settlement update and action. Mike, are you?
I am as prepared as I can be, Mr. Chair. Yes. Members of the committee, some may know and some may not know, so I'll go into a little bit of history, but not too much. Back in 2017, I believe the county board initially authorized Marathon County's participation in litigation involving the manufacturing, sale, and distribution of certain opioid medications. These are nationwide series of litigation. We joined into that litigation through some state and national law firms, where along with the vast majority of the counties in Wisconsin, along with many municipalities as well. This resolution before you is a resolution to permit Marathon County to participate in the settlement of one of those sets of litigation against Kroger. The county has previously authorized several of these similar settlements. The terms are identical. The terms are actually consistent with state law because the state legislature has actually spoken on the issue as far as how settlements are to be set up regarding these litigation settlements. And this resolution would authorize Marathon County to sign on to and receive the settlement proceeds that would be due to the county if it participated in this settlement. If we didn't participate, we wouldn't receive the funds. So that's a nutshell explanation.
Are there any questions? If not, what are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Poole, is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer to approve the resolution and settlement. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. We'll move on to the initial resolution for conduit borrowing for Bug Tussle. And Mitch Olson was general counsel for Bug Tussle is on, I don't know, it's Scott Feld. Oh, no, just Mitch. Aaron Andrews is here as our Brownfield coordinator. I put together a memo that was included in the packet. The request before us today is to move to a initial resolution to the county board to authorize conduit borrowing of up to $12 million for Bug Tussle. And that it would be part of a larger issue involving other counties led by Fond du Lac County. In November of 2021, the county board adopted a resolution in both a initial and final resolution authorizing us to partner with 4 other counties led by Fond du Lac County on up to, I think, a $78 million bond issue, of which approximately $25 million was spent on Marathon County. That $25 million includes capitalized interest, closing cost, our costs associated with the issuance of that were reimbursed by Bug Tussle. A lot of that, out of those proceeds. Bug Tussle has experienced cost increases similar to others, and Aaron can correct me, but last week we had bad news from 2 different providers. We received word from Frontier that they were withdrawing from their 2022 PSC grant application because their cost went up from an initial, they had initially thought that they put in $141,000. The county was going to provide $944,000. Their cost grew to $36,859,746 in cost. They withdrew the request for that PSC grant, and we were at one time looking at 4,200, 10,000, 6,000 homes being served. They're not going to be served because of the cost of inflation. We also heard through the PSC that Charter Communication has put a request into the FCC to abandon or not provide services under the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund on the eastern side of the county. We're still trying to understand that, and it hasn't been approved, but we've had people walk away, and we speculate that one of the reasons that they're walking away from the projects is increases in cost. Since the original grant, there are a number of factors, and I'll let Mitch or Aaron comment on those comments a little bit later. But then the second component of this conduit borrowing issue is fulfilling the commitment that the county board made in March of 2022. We had a resolution supporting Public Service Commission grant requests for Serenity, which was not funded by the PSC, Frontier, which is they're now asking to be withdrawn, and for Bug Tussle. And for Bug Tussle, that is serving the Cronenwetter, Knowlton, and Gunther areas. The original request from Bug Tussle was for $1.5 million in match from the county. We said that was out of line. What we looked at trying to do is provide a match of $235 per crossing, which netted out to a little over $142,000 as a forgivable loan upon completion of the work. Bug Tussle then requested that we provide the balance, instead of the $1.5 million grant, provide the forgivable loan and then up to a $3 million loan. The Infrastructure Committee and Finance Committee approved the loan with the thought that it would come out of the ARPA dollars. We found out in between the Finance Committee and the County Board that it wasn't ARPA eligible because of the duration of the loan. And so a commitment was made by the County Board to provide funding at a later date, subject to the approval of the County Board, up to that $3 million loan. We've had a series of discussions with Bug Tussle over the last few months. Concerns relative to the 2021 project and its progress, and we've had assurances that they're going to get much of the work done this year. But then the need to provide the funding for the 2022 match that we committed to. We were looking, the 2021 issue had a 3.45% interest. What the county received as part of that deal was we received access to each of their towers, and the original proposal was for 16 towers. They're building additional towers, and they're running middle mile fiber between the towers, and eventually we'll be hooking up residents along that middle mile with fiber to the premise. We received 24 strands of fiber that Jerry Klein and the IT department is looking to use for county operations, and space on those towers that we've used for law enforcement to replace the Dancy Tower. So we're getting something. Plus, we're receiving 40 basis points on the outstanding balance, and that's netted us about $200,000 to date. And with the conduit borrowing, we are backing their loan, but it's not a general obligation loan. It is a conduit loan, so it doesn't affect the overall general obligation limit that the county has, but rather if they default, we are obligated to do it. We have, in anticipation of that, there's been a reserve fund set aside with 2 years worth of payments in that reserve fund. So if they start drawing from that reserve fund, we will have ample notice. But then all of the assets of Bug Tussle, the towers and the fiber, are committed as collateral, and we're first in line relative to being, the creditors being able to take that. So we are secured in that, but they saw a significant increase in cost. And Mitch, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add, and then I'm going to call on Aaron.
Just the other piece, thank you, John. You did a very good job, actually. It makes my job a lot easier. One of the biggest discrepancies between the original project and the project that we ended up starting to build is just the overall amount of the fiber. Is the project budget in our original proposal from early 2021, when we primarily were starting our engagement with Marathon County, the budget number was set. Over time, what the project ended up being changed to hit some of our different objectives, to hit some of the county's different objectives. And so that's the lion's share of the differential between the project that we're looking to complete and the original budget that was set. There's definitely a component of it that is related to inflationary costs and the costs of the project increasing beyond what our estimates were. But there is a big piece of what we're looking at today is really just because we did more than we originally budgeted for. So call it scope creep, call it optimism, call it what you will, but it's a combination of inflationary factors and scope creep.
I'm going to also interject that some of the factors that drove up the cost were, I think they, along with other internet service providers, thought that they could string the fiber above ground on utility poles. I think they found, as did Charter with their RDOF, is that the poles are too far apart and won't support the fiber, and so they had to be buried. I think other people learned that the geology of Marathon County is a lot harder than they thought, and therefore there is more rock, and their cost went up associated with that. They did have some issues associated with their initial contractor and laying conduit but not pulling fiber and not connecting it, and those issues are being resolved. They've changed contractors and are making efforts to address that. And Aaron is our brownfield coordinator.
Thank you, Supervisor Robinson. Hello, everyone. Just to put the this in a broader perspective, I think they did a good job. This was a good summary of what's been happening with bug tussle. And Supervisor Robinson talked about what was happening with the other internet service providers in our county. I've been working primarily on reaching un- or underserved addresses, making sure that we work with internet service providers to reach un- or underserved addresses in our county. And the PSC has told us that there are approximately 15,000 addresses in our county that are un- or underserved. Previous to last week, we thought about more than half of those were covered by enforceable funding commitments. We have 6 currently, or had, as of last week, 6 current ongoing grant projects. 2 of those were the bug tussle ones we're referencing today. 4 others were different internet service providers. As of last Thursday, 2 of those internet service providers have stepped back from that funding. Charter has done some of their RDOF grant, but the final piece we believe the final piece was in the eastern part of the county, and that's what they have submitted to default on. So while we thought we had about 6,000 that were no longer under enforceable funding agreements, as of last week, we have now we have another 1,800 from Frontier, or 1,600 from Frontier that we know are not going to get service, and an unknown number from the RDOF grant that's defaulting. Bug tussles work in the Leather Camp area was to serve about 635. Their fiber route with towers around the county was scheduled to serve about 1,800 people, not necessarily overlapping with those 2 other grants. But it just kind of puts it in perspective of the cost increases that the other internet service providers have faced. It aligns with what Bug Tussle is running into. Now, the other issues that Bug Tussle has faced with their subcontractor, they've addressed, and they're working with a new company that is on schedule and moving forward. So that just might, if you have any questions about that and how it fits into the bigger piece, please let me know.
So the original memo that went out to the Infrastructure Committee called for $8 million. That was before we factored in capitalized interest and the reserve funds and other things. When they borrow money, they have to set money aside to make sure we get paid, that there's reserves in place to pay for the closing costs, and the increase from 8 to 12 million was there. I think they put about 20 million of the 25 million in from the initial one into the actual project, and the rest were capitalized interest and other costs. So they don't do that. So you don't get a dollar for dollar. That's to make sure that the payment. But Bug Tussle's guaranteeing payments over a 30-year period of time. We are joining other counties, and that list of the initial resolution is before us in June. The final resolution will be August, September. The initial resolution requires a majority vote of the county board. The final resolution requires a 3/4 vote of the county board. And we'll be able to work out a lot of the details. But Mike has been working with our bond counsel and others. We spent an extraordinary amount of time in the 2001 issues putting the caveats in place and all the protections for the county. Those would be mirrored in this. So I think we're in a good position financially. The administrator has been working on this. We were looking at, one of the options was fund balance. Using fund balance to make the loan. I think the concern was tying up fund balance for a 30-year period of time, and we were, I think, very encouraged when Bug Tussle said that they would look at conduit bonding versus fund balance, because I think that there was a lot of trepidation on tying up our capital for that long of a period of time. So you've got a $3 million leather camp, which is the Cronewater Knowlton Gunther project. You've got an additional $5 million for the 2021 project, and then the capitalized interest on top of that. And again, we are receiving payments of about $50,000 twice a year right now, and that will go down as the balance goes down. But we are receiving money and income from Bug Tussle associated with that issue. So are there any questions or mention any additional comments?
I'm happy to answer questions. You've done a great work. I don't have much else to say.
Supervisor Marshall.
So we have looked at what the increased cost that Bug Tussle has, and we verified the viability of the project even with the increasing in costs. Is that true? The viability of the project, have they ran the numbers again to make sure that it's viable to support revenue, support the bond payments given additional costs?
Mitch,
Yes, we have, and we're comfortable proceeding on the financing model that we have in front of you here. Everything is still good. Is the real benefit of the project is that 30-year time period, and that makes a lot of projects easier to stomach than otherwise.
And Lance, have those numbers been shared with the county to help where you can verify that you are comfortable with a 30-year payback on those as well?
I would say we haven't gotten those financials, and this is going back to what John just talked about back in 2021. That was the same, much of the same conversation was, well, it's really a question of how much risk do you want to undertake? And I will just echo what Mitch kind of alluded to in terms of the financials that they ran, that Bug Tussle ran. Initially, our conversation, as Chair Robinson referenced, was how do we come up with essentially a loan agreement to pledge our, whether it's reserves or some other reserve fund, to provide the funding for the capital that Bug Tussle needed. And we did go back and forth. I don't know how much you want to go into it, Mitch, feel free, about the various interest rates that Bug Tussle, when they ran their calculations, the term and interest rate, what worked for their financials to cash flow the projects over time. And then ultimately, as Chair Robinson referenced in our conversations internally at the county side, it's like, what other options exists? And we had that conversation about, well, conduit bonding, particularly in light of the fact that you've seen a number of other conduit bonding requests come to the county board. I don't know that, to get to the heart of your question, have I run the financials? And I'm not
verified. It's a verification. Are we comfortable with the numbers that says, yes, the project is still viable? And a follow-up question is, I know you talked about doing more than the original project requested. If the costs have gone up, why is there still an initiative to do more miles, more towers, more, et cetera?
So I'll let Mitch take that. And I mean, not to be overly blunt, but I said this in 2021, it's not an investment question for me. It's a balancing risk for the county board on risk of default. What are you pledging? And just to clarify, while the initial resolution, as Chair Robinson referenced, simple majority vote doesn't pledge you to do anything. It certainly doesn't impact your bonding capacity if you were to pass it. The final resolution, while the bond itself doesn't impact your debt capacity, the guarantee does. So you do have the additional $12 million of the more than $600 million that you actually can borrow if you choose to. I don't know off the top of my head what our statutory debt limit is, but it's substantially more than you're anywhere near. But that's really a question for the county board. We brought back in 2021 the project forward and laid out, hey, these are the options before you. And that now really the broadband task force is doing a similar thing. And again, this project is two separate things, but if you're waiting for me to look at financials, and I mean, I'm not investing in the project as an individual. There will be bonds that will be sold. Make no mistake, the bond holders are going to look, and Mitch can talk about this. My sense is they're going to look at the business case that is going to be laid out from the project itself, but also the fact that at the end of the day, the Marathon County, just like all the other counties, through each of the what are going to now be 4 tranches of borrowing that Bug Tussle has been a part of, there's a guarantee from each of the counties for the initial tranche we were a part of, I believe was about $75 million. this fourth tranche is closer to 150 or 250 million. I mean, there's a lot of counties that are participating, but we don't run financials like that. That's the question of the county board. How much risk do you want to get a project done? I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for, but Mitch, feel free to elaborate on the financials.
Yeah, I can opine a little bit. I can certainly provide whatever whomever would like to review. We've done this, as Administrator Leonard mentioned, this is our fourth issuance. The first was 5 counties for $70 million. The second was 7 counties for $92.9 million, and the third was 3 additional counties for $58 million. We've gone, that was all under the initial authorization from Fond du Lac County and a blanket authorization to issue bonds of up to $240 million. Those 3 first tranches effectively exhausted that. It was about $220 million. So we've re-engaged with Fond du Lac County, have a new blanket authorization to issue up to $250 million in bonding. And I'm currently engaged with about 12 counties at this point, and the total project cost we're looking at is about $120 million. So some of that is going to fall out in all likelihood, but we're kind of pacing at that as our expectation is to raise between $75 and $100 million in conduit debt on an annual basis. To your point on the project costs going up, why do we still want to do it? And as I alluded to earlier, it's because it still makes sense. Because based on the interest rates that you get in this environment and what we're able to do with that with the county's partnership and the population densities the take rates are seeing, if you kind of put all of these factors together, it still makes sense. It's still a viable project, and it's still a really good way to fund broadband expansion into the rural space. Last point, and just as an aside, Marathon County's GL for 2023 was $795 million. Just to plug in the answer there. I don't know what you have for outstanding debt, but that's what your limit was.
Supervisor Lemmer.
Okay, I do not understand all this cyber stuff. I don't understand the difference between fiber, cellular, and wireless, so please understand my question is because I don't get it. But it seems like we are guaranteeing the debt, I thought. Is this conduit bond, this is different than the digesters that we're talking about. And I don't know where we're at with the policy update on conduit bonding and how that, fits with this. But I would like to see the projections because I just did a little math again. Don't understand exactly what we're talking about here. And it looks like if we've got 15,000 customers that are underserved, and now up to 38 million, that's about $2,500 a person. How is that going to pencil when you can get T-Mobile right now for $70 a month? You can get Starlink, I think in Marathon County, $500 for the apparatus and then $120 a month. It seems like it'd be cheaper just to do that, but maybe I'm not understanding. And then when I lived out in the village of Maine, cable went right past my house to go up to the school, and they would not hook me up to cable because it was too expensive. So we could get fiber to these people if that's what's happening. Are they going to get it? Anyway.
Yes.
Help me here.
That's the long and short of it. That's why we're continuing to make the investment, is so that the fiber is going to these people and they can get it. Every ditch that we cut through, the landowner there will have the opportunity to take fiber as a service. Ultimately, the products you mentioned, whether it's TDSs or whether it's Starlinks, are viable options, are competitors in the space, but in the real sense is an inferior product to fiber, and is with the advancement in requirements from the industry and from users are going to be outpaced this time. So at the end of the day, there's enough effort and enough focus on this industry that it's going to keep kind of plodding along, and it's going to keep being worth the investment to continue to pour money into fiber, because that's a final answer to the problem, as opposed to using the fixed wireless product, which is good for the next 5 to 10 years, but is albeit a temporary solution. In a lot of the spaces, I mean, Starlink on the end user level is a little bit cost prohibitive. It costs about twice as much as the standard plan that we offer on the fiber side, and the TDS's fixed wireless product is definitely not available in a lot of the areas that we're burying fiber, which is really just kind of the same thing we're looking to address, is just trying to reach out and connect as many people as possible, reaching into that 15,000 unserved and underserved locations. And the directive from the feds is do it with fiber. So that's what we're trying to do.
I've been to more meetings than I care to dealing with broadband, but I think Supervisor Lemmer, to answer your question. So this system is a middle mile fiber connecting towers with the eventual ability to expand fiber to the premise. The towers are important for two reasons. One is they provide Wi-Fi service to the area, and when you think about your cell phones, 52% of data transmitted is over cell phones. So those towers are important. You can have as much fiber to the premise as you want, but it's not going to meet the needs of the mobile population. So those towers have a role to play both in the Wi-Fi component as well as cellular phone service, and they're part. One of Bug Tussle's big clients is AT&T, that rents out those towers, which is a revenue stream to Bug Tussle, which enhances the financial viability of the project. But so we benefit. And when you look at where we were in 2020 when the pandemic started, we were dealing with Frontier, regular complaints from Frontier because their old copper wires were breaking down. There was no cellular service in many of the northern towns in the county. They weren't extending new service, and there was a critical need to upgrade. To Frontier's credit, they brought in some technical crews and improve some of the service, but we still need to move ahead. And towers will be important because as we go 5G is more powerful but a shorter distance, so you need more towers coming in the future. But the middle mile is the connection between them that allows them to carry the information and the communication. So it's important to serving the residents of the county. There are a lot of other tower providers and builders, but this is an important service for public safety, and it's AT&T has FirstNet, which is for law enforcement and others, and redundant care to make sure that law enforcement has an effective communication system available to them. So it's all interwoven, and there are cellular components, there are Wi-Fi components, there are that middle mile, and there is that connection to the premise. Go ahead.
So I remember being a teacher during COVID, and it stunk to have kids living out in the far away villages. They could not access their learning. And so on the one hand, I do support this, but it's a big ask. It's a lot of money. What happens if this is not approved? What's a plan B? Is there a way to scale back the project and how do we navigate this in the event that it doesn't go through?
Mitch, I'll let you answer that from your perspective.
So, yeah, no problem. So where we currently sit is the network we have installed in Marathon County. Really, the expansion piece that we're talking about is the second connection from east to west. So we're currently, it finishes somewhere in the Stratford area, and then obviously needs to cut back to the east and cross the river through Mosinee and meet where we are just south of Weston. So that piece doesn't get done, and the county is still obligated to fund through some kind of financing mechanism the Leather Camp project. In the event the county is unable or unwilling to do that, that's probably a grant that we have to ultimately turn down with the PSC. So we could continue, I mean, we can operate our tower sites, we can operate the fiber that we have in the ground, but what the go forward would be with Marathon County would be subject to figuring out what plan B is. I would love to do the Leather Camp project however we can figure out a way to make that funding work. And the board did pass a resolution. There is that commitment there to have a way to finance the $3 million. Granted, subject to further agreement, but that's ultimately where it is the relationship between us somehow has to get that leather camp project funded.
Any other questions? Mitch, can you provide us with that financial information before the county board meeting?
Yes.
All right.
Will that have the projections?
Yeah, that's to what he was referring.
I believe that our financial advisor is looking at this as well. Mike, is that where it lands?
We had bond counsel look at the initial authorization resolution and Mike engaged with bond counsel, and they did offer kind of a review of those things, and it really echoes, well, I should say we echoed what she provided to us in our comments today, that the initial resolution, again, is a simple majority vote, doesn't necessarily bind the county to anything. However, the final resolution would be the 3/4 vote, and while the conduit bond, by virtue of the documents itself, doesn't encumber the county's debt capacity, the guarantee does. So again, the question of what happens in the event there's a formalized default. As Chair Robinson referenced, this is going back to 2021, so Mike, please correct me if I'm misstating, but part of that initial resolution and the final resolution and the various documents and processes that were set up was that Bug Tussle filled or funded a debt reserve to ensure that the payments were being made, and going to be accurate but not precise here. So we would have quite a long runway if things started to not move forward in a positive way. The other part of our guarantee is that before the county is on the hook for making any and all payments, not only does that debt reserve have to be eliminated, but also the parent company of Bug Tussle, Hilbert Communications, we would be able to tap into financing or their collateral. So I don't know, Mike, if there's anything I'm missing there, or Mitch, feel free to elaborate, but there's kind of a long series of events before the county is on the hook. But make no mistake, as I said back in 2021, this is a question of how much risk do you want to undertake to accomplish the public good of spurring broadband expansion. So and again, that's all alluded to in the memo, but I don't know if I missed anything there, Mike.
No, I don't believe so. I think, as Lance indicated, this is a question of balancing risk versus completion of the project as presented. And if the county moves forward with it, with the initial resolution, part of the in-between steps between the initial and the final resolution is getting all of those agreements worked out so that we can protect the county the best way that we can. That includes that guarantee from the parent company that, hey, if things go wrong, if that set-aside account is exhausted, then the parent company is on the hook. But again, as Lance indicated, the county does have risk, and that risk is related to ultimately we guarantee all of the money in case those other protections have been exhausted.
Any other questions? If not, what are your wishes? What are the wishes of the committee? Supervisor Marshall.
I think until we see the further information, I would like to table it until next meeting. Or I shouldn't say the word table because I know that has implications, but I would like to defer and put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
We have a motion to postpone to the next meeting. Is there a second?
No, I just wanted to ask what happens with the project if that's postponed.
I think,
If I can, Sharon, the delaying this vote until July is fine. The final resolution needs to come in August. In the event the final resolution does not pass in August, Marathon County will not be participating in this issuance of bonds. So my recommendation would be, as this is non-binding, move it forward, and then you'll have 2 months to work through the process either way. But if it's the will of the committee to delay and rerun the initial resolution gambit in July, that's fine as well.
I'm going to look to Mike. And
I was just going to comment, I think you have a meeting next Tuesday? So there is a potential that this committee could, if it was satisfied with the information it received between now and the next meeting, move it forward for county board on Tuesday evening.
again, this is an initial resolution, basically expressing intent to support. The final resolution later is the one that is binding, that would take the supermajority of the county board, understanding that there are issues that need to be resolved. So we have a motion. Is there a second to postpone to next week? If not, what are your wishes?
I'll make a second.
All right, we have a motion and second to postpone to next Tuesday. Any discussion?
I guess it's a question of process. If we postpone till next Tuesday, will that mean will it come to the full board on Tuesday? Or are we also delaying that till the board consideration in July?
It can come to the county board on Tuesday. It would not be discussed tomorrow because it hasn't passed a committee. But that would be, that it could come to before the full board on Tuesday.
So what are your, well, any other questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Opposed, no? No? I'm going to ask for a roll call because it was, so if you would call the roll.
Robinson,
No.
Marshall, Gibbs, Hart, Lemmer, Poole, Reynolds. It's a tie, 3-3.
Motion fails. What are your wishes?
I'll make a motion to approve the memo just to give it consideration to the full county board.
We have a motion to advance the resolution for, is there a second?
I will second that, but then can we bring the information that's requested? I don't know if it needs to be brought at our next meeting, but at least for that to be considered, is it possible that we could have that ready before tomorrow for full board consideration?
I think that's directed to Mitch. Was that
Yeah.
before we go there, can I have there was a second?
Let
Yes,
Mitch
okay.
answer that question and then I'll decide.
All right, Mitch, can you have that information for tomorrow?
Yeah, it is going to have the biggest draft stamp on it you've ever seen, but yes, I can have something for you tomorrow.
Then I'll make that second.
Is there any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? It carries, but not unanimously. All right. right, or the next item is, we were going to jump down to educational programs, update on the 2023 audit. Christy? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Budget timelines and priorities. And this is an annual exercise. We've laid out, and I think there's a decision that needs to be made in here relative to the timeline as to when we might want that public informational meeting. But it spells out the process that we've used. I think given the situation with Chrissy, that she has provided us with her last budget last year. Unfortunately, unless we refuse to accept her retirement or notification, I don't think that will keep her though. But you have a timeline that calls for a public hearing on either Halloween, the day after, or on November 4th. And I think we would need to try to set that today before we move that on to the county board with a little bit more. Nellie, do you have?
And I don't know, Mike, you can weigh in. I think and I thank you to Kim for making everybody aware of the compressed timeline based on just the way the calendar falls and the state statute relative to the public hearing and the notice we need to provide. But as Chair Robinson said, your options are somewhat limited, and of course you have things to consider, as Chair Robinson said, whether you want to have it on Halloween or kind of proximity to election certainly is right in that timeline. I'm not sure you need to have a formal pick a date. I think that the timeline is what the county board ultimately wants to do. This was from the staff perspective, based on direction from Chair Robinson. We took a crack at trying to get the dates to give the most time and most explanation to the county board of what we could get done at the various timelines. I'm not sure you need to have an answer until we get closer. And of course, you can always change when you're going to have your public hearing as long as it's provided for within statute. And you can change the date that you need to formally adopt a budget until statute publication. There are a number of statutes that apply, but just in terms of background, that's kind of how we arrived at this proposal for you. It's largely based on what transpired last year, which I'll say from the administration perspective was a much more formal, proactive approach than, at least in my time working for the county, that we've had in terms of a formal calendar. I think it worked very well. And then we can move on to budget priorities if you want. But in terms of timeline, I'm not sure that there's any formal requirement for you to pick a date, although I'll be very honest, I didn't confer with Mike before if he had a different opinion, so or with Christy or Kim on that. It just gives you a template as to where you are. And I will say, last budget, you did have some things you pushed off from your initial timeline.
So maybe if we go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say, just from a legal perspective, I don't think there's a requirement that you set the dates at this time. I mean, they just flow from the statute. You can certainly set those dates. The resolution that's in the packet is regarding priorities. So if you pass the resolution, it sends those priorities for consideration to the full board. It doesn't address the timeline. You could decide to do that. You're not required to. It's up to this committee and the board.
So we can take the timeline to the county board as an informational item, but the priorities, the process is for this committee to take to the county board a list of priorities, and I'll let Administrator Leonard talk about this. I think this is based on the St. Croix County approach that we've been using for some time, and sort of sets the overall parameters so he can begin shaping the budget. If there are some things that you differ in, July, we'll take the assumptions to the county board. The assumptions are inflation is going to be at X percent. Healthcare costs will go up X, Y percent. You will look at the insurance and begin to look at what the assumptions are going into framing the budget and helping him help guide him in how he's going to work with the department heads and bringing the budget. So the purpose of today is to look at the priorities resolution. Again, it's based upon what we've done in the past, not necessarily what has to go out of this committee, but it's a starting point for the discussion.
Sure, and I can kind of walk you through the priorities. And again, this is this process and the matrix largely, as Chair Robinson referenced, is taken from the approach St. Croix County had used historically. And I think immediately prior to the meeting, had a brief conversation with Supervisor Marshall, and I think really this is to kind of help me start the process. The one thing I can guarantee is, as information comes in, things are going to change. I was providing that in some of my conversations with colleagues. I'm aware of 2 counties that had health insurance initial numbers come in with either a 40% increase or another one was 20, I believe it was 23%. If we have some of those things that as we learn more, they're going to fundamentally change, they could fundamentally change to a drastic extent what we're looking at. This just gives me a little initial guidance, and I use the scoring in the red on the matrix itself just to kind of give you where I think we should be. And I don't think this will be too much of a surprise. Employee compensation, we just had interviews this morning. Chris and I sat through some. I mean, it is, and by later that afternoon, we had a candidate that had applied withdraw. So it's really, the job market is such, and this isn't a surprise to anyone, it's really imperative that we continue to retain the skilled staff we have and set ourselves up for the ability to recruit effectively from the outside. The other thing I'll say with respect to compensation is this year, and we'll talk about this at an upcoming meeting very shortly, is it's also a negotiation year for our union with the sheriff's deputies. So compensation is really important. I put that as number 1, that we look at what our allocation was and perhaps a COLA adjustment to move the pay scale. That's not to say I'm going to do it. But I think employee compensation is one of those things we need to be really mindful of. And of course, you're going to be able to give further input later. Health insurance, I just alluded to. That too, the market is a struggle. I know we've talked about that at this committee. We're going to have that update from our consultant, and as well as some of the work that we've done internally to try to evaluate what next steps to make. I put that as a number 2. Again, indicating that I fully anticipate that we're going to have to make some changes to kind of balance what I anticipate to be some increases. We don't know what those may look like, but not something that, if we get a 12%, that's not something the county as an employer can afford to take on entirely. So health insurance, kind of number 3 priority in my mind. Reserves, really, again, striving, ranking it 3rd doesn't mean that I anticipate we dip into reserves. And any reserve spending through the budget would, of course, have to be approved by the board. I still think it's a prudent policy to have, and the board has followed for a number of years to utilize our rollover process to manage reserves. I think that has worked well. New positions, I'm very in tune to the people we have, that we need to keep them. And I think we should evaluate all new position requests very stringently, which is why I ranked it number 4. That really, I can't foresee any new positions that require any levy support. I know I've had conversations with a couple of supervisors about types of positions. I know this committee has talked about perhaps a procurement position, and I think there is perhaps a way to do that in a trial posture where we would potentially use, for example, American Rescue Plan Act funding. We would encumber that, get the position created prior to the end of the year, and move in that form or fashion. But I really hesitate to think that we need to be in a position to expand our position numbers kind of in light of the challenges we have with the current staffing. We have seen some improvements, most notably, I would say, in corrections. We've seen some improvement, but that was a pretty challenging position before, so improvement isn't overly surprising. And then operating expense requests, this too shouldn't be overly surprising. Really scrutinizing the requests that come from departments in terms of their budget, as opposed to if it's requested, fund it. I don't think we'll ever have a county budget where the approach is if departments are requesting it, we really fund all their requests. But that's my initial kind of ranking of those things. The resolution in your packet was largely just taking the one from last year and making some slight tweaks to the language and putting it in a new form that Kim and Mike have developed. I didn't renumber the numbers in light of kind of where I just ranked them using that matrix. You'll see that employee compensation in the resolution is number 2. The resolution is, again, largely what you approved last year, and you'll see there's still the language in that references examining the mandated and discretionary services report, which I have updated with the department heads, and it's in, I believe it's actually in this committee packet as well as the executive committee packet, and we'll take it to all the standing committees in their coming meetings, and also the language that talks about engaging the nonprofits. That should all still be included from your last year's resolution, but I did want to make that clear. It wasn't, I just didn't want to flip the resolution to my priorities from what you had last year. I did the matrix myself, but left the resolution as is. Happy to answer any questions, however.
Any questions, Supervisor Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the health insurance, where it says should maintain the quality of the health care program, that kind of means status quo to me, and yet we have it ranked as number 2, which means there could be changes necessary. So if we could make that language more clear.
Absolutely. I think, again, that's the language the board adopted last year in the numbers 1 through 5 on the resolution. It is not, and perhaps I should have taken a different tact and actually put the language in that I would have. My suggestion would be to have the language from the matrix that I borrowed from St. Croix County, that for number 2, it would be modified benefits to reduce costs and or increase employee premiums to offset increases. That idea of balance is really what my recommendation is.
I guess I would ask that the resolution be amended as Administrator Leonard had said.
So the order would be is to get a motion on the floor relative to advancing the resolution to the county board, and then we can take up amendments. So if you want to offer an amendment, then we need to get the issue before us. So are there any questions, and then we can go into motions? Any questions? If not, a motion would be in order.
I'll make that motion.
Move to adopt or advance the resolution to the county board. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Poole. Now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I amend the motion or the resolution to indicate that an employee health insurance be using the language of may modify benefits to reduce costs and or increase employee premiums to offset increase rather than what is written.
Is there a second? seconded by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion on that motion? Supervisor Marshall.
And also continue to increase the, or to have the language while also evaluating the delivered vehicle and cost. Thank you.
All right, any discussion on that as a priority? If not, all those in favor of that amendment will signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That carries. Now, are there any other amendments, or do you wish to change the priority or order to reflect the administrator's chart, which would put employee compensation 1, health 2, capital reserves 3, new positions 4, and operating expenses 5? Or do you want to stay with the order? Or, change it or do nothing? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move operating expense request up to at least 4. One of the things I'm looking at, being a supervisor for the city of Wausau, the city has had a significant reevaluation, and I know that's hit a lot of people pretty hard, particularly in middle and lower income households, just based off of the real estate market. So I'm looking to ensure that we keep our mill rate at a lower level. I don't know if that means lowering or just keep it as it is right now, because working at City Hall, a lot of questions that we receive are, what does this mean for our tax rate? And the answer to that is we don't know until all of the entities that make up that pass their budgets. So with that feedback that I get at my job, that's a higher priority for me. Thank you.
So your motion is to do what?
I guess my motion would be to move the operating expense request to the 4th priority.
And what would you move to 5?
I would move down reserves. Well, I would move down position expansion or country.
Is there a second? Okay, seconded by Supervisor Poole. So we have a motion to change the order, change the ranking of 4 and 5, with new positions becoming 5 and operating expenses becoming 4. Any discussion on that motion? Why don't you just keep that in front of you?
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll concur with that. In the state office I work with, too, we get a lot of feedback from people who are stressed about cost of living increases, and several have mentioned, too, the housing appraisals going up and how that's going to affect their taxes. Last meeting, I did indicate that, too, that would be something I'm concerned about. So I concur that moving that up would be a good idea. Thank you.
Any other motions or amendments or discussion? If not, all those in favor of that amendment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Any other motions? If not, we'll go to the main motion as amended with the 2 amendments. All those in favor of the amended resolution will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. You have priorities.
Thank you very much.
So now we will go to the update on the audit. Christy.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I can't see if I have the video on or not. Okay. I just want to let you know that we are giving you an update on the audit. We are running behind, and we do have a time deadline, which is July 31st. So I wanted to just give you the update that the audit work is still ongoing. But due to multiple factors, we have had delays in getting it done on the original timeline. Those include longer time for final work papers to be prepared for the audit. And some of the reasons, major reasons for that were that there was issues with grant reporting. The grant reporting isn't working as we felt it should be. We are working on that right now. So some of the grants are not closed. We are trying to get those done. Another major hurdle is the mapping of the ledger from the legacy system to Workday. We've mapped over 1,500 lines, and we are, as we're going through the process of the work papers and having the auditors test those items, we are having to see that the ledgers transactions could occur in 2 ledger accounts instead of 1. So we're moving those. And lastly, we had to take people off the work of the audit because the adaptive budget software that we use to create the 2024 budget, we needed to pull them off so that they could help implement that budget back into Workday. And that was critical because that's how we were able to start doing the 2024 financial reporting. So with those setbacks, we are still trying to get the audit done on time, particularly with me leaving at the end of the month. So we want to make you aware that there are some issues and we are working on them. Some of the things that we are doing is we're continuing to work with our CVS consultants on specific areas. We do have grant and some other balance sheet item transaction training tomorrow and also into next week. Those we hope to alleviate some of the problems. Some of them, the consultant is working with us because we need to figure out step by step what the process is to get those done. So we are working with them. We have been. We've engaged them for the last month trying to get some of these final items done. Financial staff within the departments are working on individual department goals, and so there is some struggle. We need them to get their things done. They have access to some of the reports. Some of them we have to run for them. And so what we're finding that as we are getting these things done, we are trying to now continue to expand our ability to have knowledge transfer from one set of people, that's typically the finance people in the finance department, to the other departments. There are some superstars out there in the county that have grabbed hold of Workday and are actually excellent trainers and other leaders within the departments. So we're trying to start now doing more learn from each other knowledge transfer, but that takes a while to get through to everyone, and they all are trying to get that work done in the departments. If the department work is done, then we can continue to do the global financial statement transactions for the work papers for the auditors. That's also critical in Workday, more so than was in the legacy system. So that's something we didn't anticipate as much as we should have, but we are again working on that, and we again have superstars within some of our departments that are really able to grab hold of that, and we're trying to pull those people in as resources for other departments as well. We are continuing to complete the audit work, and we will continue to work in coordination with the auditors to let them know where we are. We also need to continue to produce the final financial data for 23, along with those reports that we're starting to initiate for 24. In future of the review of this original audit process, first time in Workday, first full cycle, we determined that roles of department financial staff need to be more directly involved in the development of the overall financial work for the county. Workday is more of an integrated ERP. That's why it's a modern system. That wasn't always the case in our legacy system. So that's something we need to have them more directly involved in the overall financial work and not just specifically department-driven processes. We need to continue to promote the consolidation of that work through the fiscal managers, finance people in the departments, and then assign work as needed and create deadlines for work to be completed by the fiscal staff of the departments so that we can all have that work completed. And if there are issues, we need to make sure that we're supporting and producing that final document together. And that's what we're trying to get better network of people working together on the new system, because we all know one part of it and nobody actually knows the entire brevity of Workday, but we're working on that. And then lastly, I would encourage after I leave for the promotion to continually support the strategic use of Workday consultants to clean up the financial data, but then also have more consolidation within the department finance managers and finance staff, because that's really the successful way of getting these things accomplished is by us all working together, because Workday is a more integrated system, and I think that will continue to have more success with our new ERP and Workday. That's really what my summary is. We are working on that audit. We want to get that completed on time. We do have a deadline looming. We are putting more consultant resources towards it so that we can get those final critical items done. And I would suggest in the future having a more consolidated set of working instructions so that all of us are working together and we can help each other even more than we are today. And I think that's one of the positives that we have right now, even though we haven't completed the full year. I think it is really shedding a light on our ability to work cooperatively with each other and learn from each other too. So that is the update that I have.
Are there any questions? All right. Thank you. Now we'll go back to item 6B6, motion to go into closed sessions. If somebody could read that motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to go into closed session. Roll call vote suggested pursuant to Wisconsin State Statutes 19.85 sub 1 sub E for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investigating of public funds, or conducting other specified public businesses whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Specifically, review to offer to purchase and discussion of strategy regarding the potential sale of certain county property located at 5006 Chadwick Street, 5010 Heather Street in the Village of Weston, and 1702 Plum Drive in the City of Wausau.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Marshall. Is there any discussion on the motion to go into closed session? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Marshall. Aye. Hart. Aye. Lemmer. Aye. Poole. Aye. Reynolds. Aye. Robinson.
Aye.
Thank you.
We're going into closed session. You want to, I think everyone can stay. So. Please turn the mic